Most people think being broke is a cash problem. I do not. I think it is usually a systems problem that is much more dangerous. A cash problem can be temporary. A systems problem can quietly consume 20 years of a person's life, while he keeps telling himself relief is just one raise away. That is the trap. A man wakes up at 6, he gets dressed, he commutes, he gives away the best hours of his day, he deals with a boss, a customer, a schedule, a machine, a screen, or a body that slowly gets more tired every year. He is not lazy. He is not unserious. He is not refusing responsibility. He is doing exactly what society told him to do. Work hard, stay out of trouble, pay your bills, be responsible. And yet, at the end of the month, after the rent, the insurance, the taxes, the utilities, the car payment, the groceries, and the little invisible leaks have all taken their share. He opens the banking app and sees a number so close to zero that it changes the chemistry of his whole evening. That is not just inconvenience. That is a system speaking. It is saying you are moving, but you are not escaping. I want to remove something from your shoulders before I say anything else. If you are living this way, I do not begin by accusing your character. I do not begin by blaming coffee. I do not begin by telling you to wake up at 4 in the morning and become a more glamorous victim of the same machine. The culture enjoys doing that because it keeps the working person ashamed and distracted. Shame is useful to a system that wants obedience. If you believe the entire problem is your mindset, then you do not question the design. I am not interested in feeding that lie. I am interested in the mechanics. The first thing a rational person should ask is not how hard am I working. The first thing he should ask is what game am I actually inside, because the rules of a game matter more than the effort of the player. A man can run with magnificent discipline on a treadmill that is pointed nowhere. He will still go nowhere. That is how much of the modern financial life is built. You were handed a model, go to school, get employable, sell your hours, put some cash in the bank, borrow when necessary. Buy enough status to look as though it is working. Repeat until old age. That model produces very little freedom. It produces dependence dressed up as adulthood. I am going to reduce the whole machine to 3 traps. Not because life is simple, because these 3 traps explain most of why hardworking people remain broke far longer than they should. The first trap is selling time as though time were scalable. The second trap is storing wealth in a form designed to decay. The third trap is using debt to purchase the appearance of success while the substance keeps slipping away. If you understand those 3 things clearly, the fog begins to lift. You stop blaming your soul for what is really a structural problem, and only then can you begin building an exit. Let us start with the first trap. The first reason so many people stay broke is that they are living inside what I call the time cage. From the first moment you were trained for the adult world, you were taught to think of money in a very specific way. Hours become wages. Wages become survival. More money means more hours. It sounds fair because it is so familiar. It is also the great financial ceiling for most of the population. Time is finite. That is the whole problem. You cannot print more of it. You cannot refinance it. You cannot ask the universe for a temporary increase in inventory. A day gives you 24 hours, and a meaningful part of those hours are already spoken for before you even begin working. Sleep, travel, eating, basic maintenance of the body. A person can become more efficient. Yes. A person can improve skills. Yes. But if the whole model is still built around exchanging physical presence for money, then the scale of the future remains limited by biology. That is what most people, they think higher hourly pay is the answer. Higher hourly pay helps. It is not liberation. A man earning $20 an hour is constrained by the day. A man earning $60 an hour is also constrained by the day. One cage is nicer than the other. It is still a cage. This is why so many high-income people remain fragile. The public imagines income and freedom are almost identical. I have never believed that. Income without ownership is motion without escape. You are running harder in a better neighborhood. The dependence remains. The market also sees you more clearly than you see yourself. The market does not pay you for effort. It does not pay you because you are tired. It does not pay you because you have good intentions. It pays you according to the value of the problem you solve and how replaceable you are. That last phrase makes people uncomfortable. Good, truth often does. If your employer can replace you quickly with somebody slightly younger, slightly cheaper, or slightly more desperate, then your bargaining power is weaker than your work ethic. That is just the arithmetic of labor. People like moral language. The economy likes functional language. What matters to the machine is not how exhausted you feel on Friday. What matters is how much leverage sits behind your role. If you do something that can be learned quickly by a very large pool of people, then your income ceiling is under pressure, no matter how decent you are. That does not make you worthless, it makes you vulnerable. The modern culture keeps confusing dignity with leverage. A job can be dignified and still offer little leverage. And the absence of leverage is where many financial lives get trapped. I want you to imagine two men moving dirt. One is given a shovel, the other is given an excavator. The man with the shovel sweats more. His back hurts more. His hands are rougher. He looks more heroic to the sentimental eye. The man in the excavator moves far more dirt. The market does not care who appears more noble. It rewards output and scale. That is why a person who keeps relying only on his body to create income will always be at a disadvantage relative to a person who commands systems, code, capital, media, distribution, audiences, assets, or businesses that continue working when he is not physically present. Leverage is what separates labor from capital. Leverage is what separates effort from escape. A piece of software sold 1,000 times is leverage. A business with employees and repeat customers is leverage. An asset that throws off cash flow while you sleep is leverage. A piece of media viewed by 1 million people with almost no extra cost is leverage. A productive asset that rises with inflation and still feeds you is leverage. If you must be awake and present in order for every dollar to arrive, then the machine still owns too much of you. Now, I am not telling anyone to quit his job tomorrow and become a philosopher of leverage while the rent goes unpaid. That would be foolish. I am saying something much more practical. A wage job may be necessary. It must not remain the entire architecture of the future. That is the key distinction. Employment can be the engine that keeps you alive while you build leverage. It must not become the only engine you ever own. Once you understand that, your evenings start looking different. Your spare hours stop being random. Your learning becomes more intentional. You begin asking a new question. What can I build, learn, or control that separates my future income from my immediate physical presence? That is the right question. Not how can I grind 10% harder inside the same cage. The first trap, then, is the time cage. You stay broke because your income is tightly bound to your body, your schedule, and your replaceability. That is painful. It is also fixable. But if a person somehow fights through that, if he works hard enough and saves something anyway, he usually walks directly into trap. Trap number two is more insulting because it punishes behavior that sounds responsible. This is what I call the melting bucket. The world teaches children that saving money is always good. Put money in the bank, be careful, be disciplined, watch the number rise. That is not entirely wrong. It is just incomplete enough to become destructive. Cash has a purpose. Cash is not wealth. That distinction matters enormously. Cash is useful for transactions. Cash is useful for reserves. Cash is useful for short-term safety. But the modern saver is often trained to think that a pile of currency is the destination rather than the bridge. That is a dangerous misunderstanding. Modern money is not a stable block of stone. It is a claim inside a political and financial system that can be diluted whenever those in charge choose dilution over visible pain. That is the world we actually live in. The saver thinks he is storing value. Too often he is storing melting purchasing power. If the currency can be expanded, and if the cost of life keeps rising, then a bank balance that looks emotionally reassuring may be economically shrinking in real terms the entire time it sits there. This is one of the cruelest tricks in modern finance, because it allows people to feel prudent while quietly getting poorer. Nothing dramatic happens. Nobody breaks into the account. The number is still visible. The statement still arrives. But the life that number can buy becomes smaller. That is a hidden tax. It is one of the most efficient wealth transfer mechanisms ever invented, because most victims do not fully understand it while it is happening. Inflation is not only a macroeconomic talking point, it is a daily confiscation from those who store too much life energy in static currency. The wealthy understand this far better than the working class does. That is why they do not sit on large mountains of idle cash for long periods unless they have a very specific reason. They convert money into claims on productive enterprise, real assets, useful property, strong businesses, and other structures that can reprice or compound. The ordinary saver, by contrast, often puts his faith in the bank balance itself. He says, I have $50,000 maybe. The more honest question is, what can that $50,000 do 5 years from now if it remains where it is and the cost of everything around it continues rising? That is the question people avoid because it makes cash feel less innocent. I am not saying never hold cash. Only a fool says that. A reserve matters, liquidity matters, an emergency fund matters. But a person must know the role of cash. Cash is a tool, not a religion. Reserve money should protect continuity. Excess money should be moving toward ownership. A person who stores all progress in currency is often freezing himself inside a losing game. That is why I call it the melting bucket. He works, he fills the bucket looks solid. Meanwhile, a hole at the bottom keeps widening through inflation, low yields, and the slow erosion of purchasing power. He keeps filling. The system keeps leaking. That is no way to become free. The third trap is the most human of all because it is not only economic, it is emotional. This is the trap of financing and identity. A person begins to suspect he is not getting ahead. He sees the balance after bills. He feels the pressure. He notices that true wealth still feels distant. But he also lives inside a social environment where status is visible and immediate. So he reaches for the one thing the modern system offers almost endlessly: credit. Credit is marketed as convenience. Very often it is rented image. The car, the phone, the wardrobe, the vacations, the meals, the apartment in the neighborhood that signals arrival. The whole structure becomes a performance of success financed by future labor. That is one of the grimmest arrangements in modern life. You borrow from your future body to purchase present social camouflage. Then you spend years working to defend the camouflage. This is why so many people who look prosperous are actually one serious disruption away from panic. They are not wealthy. They are financed. And financed is not the same as free. A financed life can look very impressive. The trouble is that every borrowed status symbol adds another monthly claim on your future hours. This is why I distrust consumer debt so deeply. It is not only expensive in percentage terms, it is expensive spiritually. It trains a person to use the future as a fuel source for present identity maintenance. That is poisonous. A car loan on a machine that loses value. Credit card debt on things already consumed. Installment plans on devices that will be outdated long before the debt feels old. All of this is sold as modern normal. Modern normal is one of the costliest phrases in the language. If you want to understand why many households remain tense, even on decent incomes, look at the ratio of their future hours already sold. That is the invisible burden. A man with large consumer debt is not only short on cash, he is short on sovereignty. He cannot say no easily. He cannot pause easily. He cannot survive interruption easily. He has too many masters. That is why I say the debt-funded illusion is the third trap. The person cannot yet truly buy freedom, so he buys symbols that imitate success instead. That imitation is maintained with debt. The debt then demands labor. The labor then keeps him too tired to build leverage. The whole circle completes itself. That is the modern trap in one sentence. You sell your time, store what remains in a melting bucket, and then borrow against the future to feel momentarily stronger in the present. That is why hard workers remain broke. Not because they are morally inferior, because their effort is being routed through a machine designed to keep them dependent. Now let me say something important. Blame is not the point, clarity is the point. Once you understand the machine, you stop insulting yourself with the wrong diagnosis. You stop saying, I am just bad with money. You stop saying, I am just not disciplined enough. Maybe you do need better discipline, but discipline aimed at the wrong target is still wasted. A person can be very disciplined inside a failing system and still not get free. The answer is not more shame. The answer is sequence. You need a new sequence. That is what I would call the escape protocol. First, stop the bleeding. That sounds simple. It is extremely hard because many people are emotionally bonded to the very expenses that are killing them. But there is no elegant way around this step. If you are carrying high-interest consumer debt, that debt is your emergency. I do not care how exciting the market looks. I do not care what your friend bought. I do not care what grand business dream you are entertaining while the credit card is charging you 20%. That debt must be treated like a house fire, not a chapter, a fire. The first act of freedom is refusing to finance the illusion any longer. That may mean selling the expensive car and buying the dull one. That may mean killing the subscriptions. That may mean letting your status fall in the eyes of people who were never going to rescue you anyway. Good. I would rather look poorer for 2 years and become stronger for 20 than perform success while privately bleeding. Second, build a reserve that protects continuity. This is where people overcorrect. They either keep no cash and call it courage, or they become worshippers of dead cash and call it prudence. Both are mistakes. You need enough liquidity that one ordinary life event does not force you back into consumer debt or into selling productive assets at the wrong time. That is the role of a reserve. It does not need to make you rich. It needs to keep you from becoming fragile. A reserve is not laziness. It is protection for the rest of the machine. Third, build leverage. This is the part most people want to skip because it is the most demanding in the beginning. You will not escape the time cage by wishing at it. You must build something the body alone does not have to carry, a higher value skill, a side business, media code, sales ability, operations knowledge, a digital product, a small service system that can grow beyond your direct hours, an audience, ownership in a real business. There are many forms leverage can take. What matters is not which one looks fashionable. What matters is whether it begins separating future income from present hours. That is the test. If your evenings and weekends still belong entirely to recovery and distraction, I understand why. But understand this too. If you never use some portion of your non-working life to build leverage, the job will remain your only engine, and your freedom will remain delayed almost indefinitely. That is not condemnation. It is physics. Fourth, convert surplus into ownership, not into the melting bucket. Once bad debt is gone, the reserve exists, and leverage begins producing even a little extra cash. The next step is not celebration spending. It is ownership, broad market index funds for many people, quality, productive assets, real businesses, real claims on enterprise, not static piles of cash beyond what continuity requires. Ownership matters because ownership breaks the direct chain between your body and all future survival. A business can earn while you sleep. An index fund can rise with productive enterprise while you are at work. A productive asset can throw off cash flow while your body rests. That is what the wage alone can never fully do. And fifth, reject the ego tax permanently. This may be the hardest step because it is less financial than psychological. You must stop needing to look successful before you have become strong. This requires an internal scorecard. You have to be able to sit in a reliable old car while someone beside you drives something much more expensive and not feel reduced. You have to be able to live in a smaller place than your income might theatrically justify. You have to be able to say no to the social spending that buys witnesses, but not freedom. That is not deprivation. It is insulation from manipulation. The person who no longer needs applause becomes much harder to trap. That is the deeper reason the wealthy often appear strangely plain to those who expected more display. Real strength rarely has to advertise itself. Now, a person may hear all of this and say it sounds severe. Perhaps math often sounds severe to those who were raised on slogans. The slogans were softer. Work hard and it will come. Save money and you will be safe. Buy nice things and you will feel like you are making it. Unfortunately, the real system is less sentimental than the slogans. Hard work without leverage keeps you tired. Saving in a melting currency keeps you anxious. Debt-funded status keeps you trapped. That is the honest version. The honest version is harsher. It is also more useful, because once you understand it, you can stop trying to solve a structural problem with motivational language. You cannot think your way out of bad arithmetic. You have to redesign the machine. That is the whole project. Not hating the system, not fantasizing about escape without work, not admiring hustle for its own, redesigning the sequence of your financial life. Most people are not poor because they failed to work. They are poor because their effort is feeding systems that do not let effort compound in their favor. That is a different diagnosis, and it leads to a different solution. Your job can support the transition, but it cannot remain the final architecture. Your savings can protect continuity, but they cannot remain idle in decaying form. Your spending can include joy, but it cannot be used to rent self-respect from strangers. Once you know those rules, the game changes slowly at first. Then more visibly. That is how freedom begins, not with a speech, with sequence. The person who changes sequence changes trajectory. And trajectory over enough years becomes fate. That is the truth. The system never says clearly, not because it is secret, because saying it clearly would make more people dangerous to the machine. A person with leverage, reserves, ownership, and no need for ego purchases is much harder to control. He can say no, he can wait, he can survive interruption, he can think. That is what real wealth buys first, not luxury room. And room is what the trapped person has not had for a very long time. That is why this matters. Not because it will make you feel inspired for a day, because if you really understand it, you will stop asking the wrong question. You will stop asking, how can I work harder inside a bad system? And you will begin asking, how do I stop feeding the system that keeps converting my effort into dependence? That is the right question. And once a person starts asking the right question, the maze begins losing some of its power over him.